Welcome to the Thresholds of Reality, the podcast where we explore unexplained and mysterious events, phenomena, and legends. Today we are talking to author Robert Kopecky, a survivor of multiple near-death experiences. We're going to find out what happened to him and what he learned from those experiences. So strap in as we explore the edges of the unknown. Hello, Robert. Thank you for joining us today. We've been kind of pursuing an exploration of near-death experiences all month. We've had some really harrowing tales. And I understand you've got 3 near-death experiences that you are going to share with us today.
Yeah, like I was telling you before the show, that takes a little extra for some people. And in my case, one was not enough. But yeah, I've got 3 fairly harrowing tales and definitely exploring the edges of the unknown,
That's what we like.
All right.
So what happened to you?
Well, I'll just start with the first one. I had 3 over about 15 or 16 years, and they were kind of equally spaced. They started in the mid-'80s. And I was just like a busy guy in Los Angeles, working a couple of jobs at the same time. I took my wife at the time to the airport and dropped her off, and I was heading back home in kind of a unfamiliar neighborhood at dusk. And it'll date when this happened because I had a malfunction with my cassette deck, right? As I was driving. It ate my tape. And I ejected it, and I'm pulling this, strand of tape out, which kids won't know what I'm talking about at all. It's like hitching up a horse and carriage kind of. But I thought I was on a street that went straight, but it had a little jog in it, and there was a car that was parked kind of sideways, sticking out a little bit, and I clipped off of it, and I went right into a utility pole going about 35 miles an hour, maybe 40 miles an hour, something like that. And boom, black. The next thing I knew, I was at the top of the utility pole, and I look over, and there's the light, the street light, and it's come on, and there's like a moth or a bug or something kind of flying around it. Things are like kind of hyper real. And I look down below me, and here's my car piled into this telephone pole with the hood kind of crumpled and popped open and steam coming out, and there's fluid running onto the ground, that kind of thing. And I'm in this place where I can look over this hedge and see somebody's side yard, and I can kind of, I kind of got a bird's eye view of this neighborhood. I see lights going on some of the side porches and stuff, and people coming out. They heard the crash. And I tried to kind of levitate downwards, as it were, to communicate with people, but nobody heard me. Apparently, I was a ghost at the time. And at the same time, I had this experience that a lot of near-death experiencers will tell you, and there are certain things that are in common with all of them, and in common with the 3 ones that I had. But I had this sense of being enfolded into a greater consciousness, like being part of a larger mind, and having this sense of just this kind of like loving, transcendent unity, that you'll hear a lot of near-death experiencers talk about. Since this all happened, and I put out my first book, which looks like this, How to Survive Life and Death, I've ended up hearing all kinds of stories and being at the conferences, and so I've kind of accumulated all the things that we share, all the things we have in common. And certainly that was one of them, was that I felt like me. Obviously I had eyes, so sort of somewhat, so I was seeing things, but I was not aware of having a body. I didn't notice my hands or anything. What I did notice was that there seemed to be a personage behind me, like there was somebody there up at the top of the telephone pole with me. And they're putting me into the back of an ambulance at this time. And I kind of got this prompt that it wasn't doing any good for me to be there. It was time to go. And I got sort of shepherded off, not to get biblical, but I was just sort of like my guardian angel, so to speak, like shepherding me off. And I remember entering into just this kind of cloud realm, like warm gray clouds. And then I don't remember exactly what happened, but I did at some point emerge and find myself in this very pastoral place. It was very much like a park or, a beautiful green, bucolic kind of setting. And it seemed like there were other personages around and one kind of across from me. Now, when I recount my near-death experiences, I keep them just the way they were the next day. I've had more stuff come in, but I know how unreliable human memory is.
Yeah.
And that I might just be creating stuff out of whole cloth. It doesn't mean that it's not meaningful to me or it's not valid and that these memories of near-death experiences aren't. But in my case, I like to keep it just the way it was. I don't remember features. I don't remember names. I couldn't tell you if this was an angel or Jesus or whatever. I just remember this kind of energy personage that I kind of had an interview with in a way. Like we talked about important stuff, apparently. I don't really remember exactly what the conversation was about, but it went on for some time. And then I came back to this plane, so to speak, about 20 hours later or so. I'd been moved from one hospital to another so that a plastic surgeon could work. I'd broken out the windshield with my forehead, and I'd messed up the steering wheel with my face. So that's what happened. And they needed to move me around a little bit. I had my head all wrapped up in bandages, and I was in a room being monitored, and there was a nurse there and stuff. And I didn't have health insurance at the time. So they, like the next morning, they wheeled me out to the loading dock and put me in a yellow cab and sent me home. And my wife was gone. She'd flown off, and when I called her, she came right back. And I kind of started to tell her about this that had happened. And, even my wife, already was looking at me sort of funny. And I had that experience when I tried to relate to people. I was in this park and there were, I had this interview and stuff, and people were like, okay, well, yeah, it's good to see you. Take it easy. And a week or two later, I still had bandages on my head. I rode my bicycle because the car was in the shop. And I went back to this neighborhood. And I looked around. I got off my bike and I walked around. I looked behind the hedge and stuff. And there was the porch. There were the trash cans, the backyard, everything that I had seen and only could have seen from up high. So I confirmed the fact that I was disembodied spirit, right? And that I had entered into this sort of extra dimension, this extra dimensional realm, where I witnessed everything from that level, and then moved on into this sort of world between worlds, or whatever it was exactly, and had this experience that I couldn't really talk to people about. I think I had seen In Search Of with Leonard Nimoy about the light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah.
And that was the only thing I knew about near-death experience at that time. So that was my first one.
Can I ask a question before we move on to the next one?
Sure.
You mentioned it was a 20-hour time frame. Was your perception of the time in kind of the pastoral area, the other plane, was that the same? Was it like a one-to-one time frame, or did you have a difference? Was it a distinction between how quickly time passed in one place versus the other?
Yeah. No, what I can tell you is that I had no perception of time there. Right? I didn't have it. In fact, I didn't experience really like serial thought the same way.
Sorry about that.
Our life right now here is marked by serial thinking. You go from one thought to the next thought to the next thought to the next. And sometimes they make sense together, and other times they're pretty random and stuff like that. I didn't have that. I felt more like my mind had opened up and was part of this whole thing. So this wasn't an interview like a job interview. It was on a cosmic level. It was a cosmic conversation, kind of, you know what I mean? And so time did not really exist as such for me there. And I had no sense of how much time had passed until I found out it was, the next day, basically.
So you didn't have any recollection of going from the first hospital to the second hospital, or you had recollection of that as well as being separated from your body?
I woke up, or I became briefly conscious when I was in an ambulance, and I don't know if that was the original ambulance or the one that they put me in to move me. I'm not sure. So that was all.
Wow. Okay, so this wasn't the last experience that you had.
No, this was only the first. I was only warming up.
Yeah.
As I said, I didn't really have anybody I could talk to. We didn't have this community, and I have spoken numerous times now at the International Association for Near-Death Studies conferences, and I've done lots of shows and stuff about near-death experience, and it didn't exist at that time. There were a couple noted authors like Raymond Moody or Kenneth Ring that had put out these now famous books about the subject, but I didn't know about it. And I went back to my regular life. I went back to work. I didn't talk about it and stuff. And I did, however, start doing more kind of like spiritual things. I quit work, basically. I was self-employed, so it wasn't a stretch to do that. But my first wife and I took off and traveled around the world for a year. And we went to all kinds of cathedrals and temples and, sacred places, and explored the Mayan underworld before, it was an eco-tourist thing to do, and tiki in the South Pacific and stuff. And so there was really this kind of need to explore the spiritual aspect of our being that I had not really had before. And when I came back too, when we came back, we were greeted by my aunt being put into the hospital. And this was a woman who had really kind of co-raised me when I was a kid. She was real important to me. And I went to the hospital and was there when she died. I was at her bedside when she died, basically, and felt this sense, of the extra reality kind of thing. And it kind of put me in, that year or so kind of put me into a spin. I ended up basically leaving my wife. I moved to New York City. I kept doing the same work that I was doing, which was illustration, graphic design, animation design, stuff like that. And I was quite successful in junk, but I lived the life of a nocturnal denizen. I was pretty self-destructive and party things and, like long hours, that kind of thing. And I really burnt the candle at both ends. And as a result, I had this one instance where I suffered this kind of cascade of my systems breaking down from all kinds of drug abuse and drinking and no sleep and stuff like that over a couple of years. And I collapsed in my apartment, and laying on the ground, everything pretty much went numb from the waist or from the neck down. And my girlfriend was there at the time, and she was starting to like holler at me and stuff, but she faded out. It's like the whole room filled in with this brilliant white cloud. Everything else went away. And I was in this place. It's kind of like if you look out the window of a jet aircraft when you're going through the clouds, and it's just this radiant, brilliant kind of. And again, I did not feel alone. It was as though there was somebody behind me. I never turned around, mind you, and like introduced myself or anything. There was just this like, okay, you're here now, and look over here. This kind of directing my vision. And a kind of a screen type thing opened up in this radiant cloud. And it was sort of like a box of projected reality, so to speak, and started playing scenes from my life, past scenes. And it wasn't like a best of reel. It wasn't a highlight reel or something. These were situations where I had not been present in an appropriate way, or, like I had opportunities that just went by me and I didn't notice because I was too full of myself, or I was injuring somebody in a way that I didn't realize because, they should know better, like kind of ego related injuries that I was causing to people. And there was a string of these, maybe 5 or 6 of these sort of episodes that were like I could reach into it and participate. They were dimensional. It wasn't just like watching a screen thing. And I don't remember exactly. This is a case where I have remembered since stuff, but I'm not sure where that's really arisen from, whether those really were the specific scenes that I was shown. So I try not to elaborate too much on that, but I've had these things come back to me that were very meaningful at times in my life. And the whole thing was pretty darn meaningful for me because they made me understand sort of the nature of being in the moment, like right now is when everything happens. And I started then to hear the voice of my girlfriend, like hollering and crying or something. And the cloud kind of started to dissipate a little bit, and some aspects of the real world of the room started to come back in, and the cloud just sort of washed away. And there was my girlfriend over me, and it was just like stark and super contrasty. And it's like, oh no, kind of thing. And I was still pretty much out of it, but I kind of rallied slowly over maybe 45 minutes or so to kind of get back to on my feet sort of thing. And that was my second, which, if my first was an out of body, what they typically call the motifs of them, this was a life review of a near-death experience. Yeah, that was the second one.
So during that, you were going over these situations in your life that were not the best situations. Was there anything that was there to like help you correct it or to change it, or they're just showing you look at these things that you've done?
No, the sense that I got was that this was like making me teachable about such episodes. I wasn't participating in the sense that I was re-entering it and trying to fix it. And I really hadn't yet grasped the concept in my normal life, as it is, that I could change things the way that I did things, because I was still really subject to my thoughts, to my serial thinking. Like my thinking is who I am. What I think is who I am. And I still really kind of felt that way and went about life that way. I had this stuff riding with me at a level, but I had already learned that I couldn't really talk to people about it because they looked at me, funnier than usual if I brought this stuff up. So it didn't make me teachable. It still, 2 times, still didn't really make me teachable. I kept on living in a very similar fashion, a little more carefully.
Yeah, you mentioned, the kind of the quest after the first experience, the first NDE. You have this kind of thirst for spiritual spaces, and then that you have that kind of dramatic turn towards destructive experiences.
Yeah, but
I
think that
why do you think you had such a big dramatic turn?
I think that was kind of the same thing, actually. And, it sounds a little crazy, but people who have drug and alcohol issues often are searching for a spiritual solution. It's like you get this feeling when you're high that you're connected and that everything's okay, right? And so Carl Jung called it a low-level search for God.
Yeah, so it's kind of like that transcendent feeling can be chemically induced to a certain extent, right? So
briefly.
Okay.
Yeah, but
so
the consequences.
That's kind of what you were after.
I think so. That's fortunately passed now some 20 odd years since that was an issue in my life. But that also, if you get hit in the head hard enough times, either you die from it or you go, something, maybe I need to do things a different way.
Yes.
I hadn't completely learned because I have the third one, which is my least favorite. You might like it the best. A lot of people find it my comeuppance kind of.
Yeah. So what happened?
The third one. Okay. I started traveling from New York City, where I was living and working, and had kind of recovered from that. I was out of that relationship, but my brother was opening a restaurant in Arizona, a small university town in Arizona. And I moved there. I was going back and forth. I was like snowbirding. And it was a Super Bowl Sunday, and I had a girlfriend there in Arizona, and I arrived just a couple days before, and I went to see the Super Bowl with some friends in this college town. And after the game, my girlfriend was at her place, and I went out, and this was 1997 or so. So from the mid 80s to the late 90s was kind of the span of these three instances. And I got on a payphone. That also dates me. To call her, and I got assaulted by a guy like a skinhead, big kid with a shaved head and baggy shorts and tats and stuff. And this was a while back, so. But there was a cruise of these kind of skinheads around in this college town. And he was drunk and he was harassing me. I was overdressed. I'd just come from New York City, so I looked like a likely target to him, I guess. And he reached in and hung up the phone on me when I was talking to my girlfriend. I talked him down and he left, and I called her back, and he came back and he started like really assaulting me. And I had in my youth a lot of martial arts training. So I made a terrible, terrible mistake that I will always regret. I planted my back foot and I punched him right on the chin, just like a rock'em sock'em robot. And the guy stood straight up and went right over like a tree, just boom. And people around me like applauded, right? Because they had witnessed this belligerent skinhead assaulting me. What I didn't know was that there was a van of these guys that were watching the whole thing. And I made quick my escape and got on my bike, and I'm heading to my girlfriend's place. And I didn't realize these guys were pulling up alongside of me in their van. And they hit me in the back of the head with a tire iron or a crowbar or something like that as they drove alongside of me. And I went off head first into the curb. And the next thing I knew, I was in a place that was not nearly as heavenly. There were no clouds or anything. It was very kind of appropriately maybe womb-like or subterranean. And I had these personages around me, again, indistinct. I don't remember exactly what they looked like and stuff, but there were a number, maybe 5 or 6 or something, it seemed like. And I had this sense that in the other room, something terrible was going on. Well, I found out later in the police report that the skinheads were stomping and kicking me and stuff. And I ended up with badly broken ribs on one side and a 3rd-degree shoulder separation and a big split in my head and stuff. And in the meantime, they're telling me, these personages are telling me that, obviously things are not going the way that they're supposed to for me, and that I need to return. And I didn't want to return. I'd had enough. I had the 2 ones before that, and these kind of instances of mortality that even though I hadn't discussed with other people had deeply affected me. And I felt, again, and always in these experiences, this sense of transcendent unity, like I was warm and safe and I was okay there. I was protected. I was fine with it. I did not want to go back into wherever that was going on out there.
Yeah, I bet.
But they kind of like picked me up, is the way I remember it. And all these hands that just kind of pushed me through a sort of a membrane or a barrier that I kind of like popped through. And I opened my eyes. I was on my back in the street, and there was an emergency medical worker over me who went, "He's back." And, I went on to get surgery and stuff to repair all of it. This is why it's my least favorite near-death experience. But, they basically told me that I had something to do that I hadn't done, and that I was missing my reason. And that was why I couldn't stay. I had to go back. And this is another sort of common motif with near-death experiencers, that there's this being forced back into life to perform your true function, that kind of thing. So that was the third one, and definitely the most painful of them all.
So they didn't really tell you what you had to go back for. They just said you got something to accomplish and take care of. So you're not ready yet.
Yeah. They left that to me to figure out for myself, kind of. And it took me a while to figure out too, because even then, I still didn't really change things. I went back to New York and I reestablished myself, and I worked successfully and stuff, but I just I could not align myself with life very well. And then a couple of years after that near-death experience, 9/11 happened, and I was downtown New York, and I essentially witnessed, I was there.
Wow.
And I walk out on the street, and the streets are full of these clouds of dust and smoke and stuff like that. And I had this intense sense of a swirling, sort of a tempest of disinterred souls, so to speak, like souls. And I remember standing on a street corner kind of and thinking, I wonder if anybody else is noticing this. And it was kind of starting to occur to me then, I think more literally, that I maybe had been changed by these experiences finally. And something happened that day. I kind of checked out, and I got myself a little cabin on the upper Delaware River, 2.5 hours out of New York. And I started to go up there, and I kid you not, I sat on a rock by the river. And I sat on that rock for a good part of the next 15 years. And 7 years into it or so, I developed this meditation practice. And I started to experience these similar kinds of experiences to the near-death experiences, these feelings of transcendent unity and stuff, and this ability to compassionately detach from my own thoughts, so that I recognized my thoughts were not who I am, that I'm something other than that. Thinking requires consciousness, but consciousness does not require thinking.
Yeah.
And that was when really the realizations started to happen for me. So it was some years after, and it was after I established a meditation practice. And I'd had this blog where I published animation and illustration work that I did. And I started to spontaneously publish spiritual essays that were arising. I got really interested in all different kinds of texts and scriptures and quantum physics and ghost stories, NDEs a little bit, but even then not so much, but all these different kinds of paranormally oriented or otherwise academically religious kinds of materials. And I just spontaneously started writing this stuff, and those essays became popular. I got contacted by Gaia.com or BeliefNet, or these like online spiritual publishers and stuff. And I started contributing to them, and I basically got a message to write a book while I was sitting on the rock. And I did it in just a few weeks, about 100 pages of it, and Googled spiritual publishers in Brooklyn, and the company came up, and I sent it to them, and the guy called me the next day, and I ended up being a published author and getting an agent and having a second book come out on the issue, and here I am talking to you guys about it.
So you think maybe your what they sent you back for was to do that? Was to write this book, was to explain your story, to help others, or?
Sure, yeah, as part of it. but it's, it's a larger picture for all of us in that sense, because what all this stuff implies, and I presume we're going to really kind of start talking about what those
Yeah, let's
lessons
go.
were.
Hmm.
And what it all implies is that there's this spiritual technology going on that's right underneath or around or existing through all of this that we're participating in, but we're limited by our forms. We kind of have a perception problem with really seeing, we are sixth sensory beings. And you guys have a show about the thresholds of reality. So obviously you're interested in all this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
As was really kind of forced on me, So it's not just the fact that I can talk to people about these and try to convince them that we're alive before we're born and we're alive after we die, and that it's just like stepping into another room. Unless you suffer for a long time, death is not dying completely. And people ask me, "Are you afraid to die?" and stuff, and I go, "Yes, I do. I am afraid to die because I'm a human being, right?" And in fact, the theme of my first book is a Woody Allen quote that I'm not afraid of dying. I just don't want to be there when it happens.
Yeah.
And having been there a few times, I can attest to that. You don't really want to be there when it happens, but it's an easy transition and it's a beautiful thing immediately. And so I have that message to give to people, but I also recognize that instead of my life being like a Hollywood blockbuster where I'm the male lead, it's much more like an indie film with a handheld camera. And I might be just a supporting role, kind of. I have these circles, these kind of karmic circles in my life that I need to come back around for and to round out. There are people who depend on me for things in my life, and it's important to show up for the people that are depending on you. It's as important as anything else. It's more important in many ways than me being known for writing or for having this message or something. That's each of us has this unique story. I like to think of us each as being these karmic packages of data, karmic data. And we are filtering this fundamental divine consciousness that makes everything that we see possible, throughout the universe. Consciousness is a fundamental field, and we are filtering it through these packages of genes and experiences, physicality, the limitations of being human, that kind of stuff. The first near-death experience, I had an out-of-body thing, and it gave me the gift of spiritual perspective. We are energetic light beings that are traveling around in these unfortunate vehicles, speaking for myself. And you can detach yourself from that and rise above it imaginatively in your mind in situations, and see all of these kind of other people struggling to get what's important to them out, and dealing with this whole terrestrial system that we're all dealing with. But you can have this kind of compassionate detachment from it and witness the folly of being a human.
Yeah.
Witness it in myself and forgive myself for that, and then witness it in other people and have compassion for them and recognize. One of my mentors says, "Did you guys curse on this show at all?"
Yeah, you can.
Yeah,
Yeah.
go ahead.
A little
My
bit.
mom watches the show, so let's keep that.
One of my mentors says, "I really appreciate your spiritual approach to dealing with other people, Robert. But the fact is that some people are just assholes." And you get a chance to witness that. I've been an asshole myself lots of times. I know what that feels like exactly. It's usually because I'm suffering in some way. And so I got this perspective, this spiritual perspective, from actually being knocked clear of my body and seeing this plane of being, the material plane. On the second one, like I mentioned earlier, it's like about now. We live in the eternal moment. This is when it all happens, is right now. And it's always been that way. I don't perceive life all that much differently than I did when I was a little kid. I mean, I've always been me in here. It's just all the rest of the stuff is changing.
Yeah.
Right? And so I know now, this is the lesson I learned from those episodes I was shown, that when I'm dealing with people, I have to be present. There's an opportunity here possibly to be of service to somebody, or to play a positive role in someone's life, or to make good on a great opportunity, for example, where you say no to something, and then a couple of years later you're like, why did I say no to that?
Yeah.
And so being present in this moment is key. It's essential, right? The power of now, right? Eckhart Tolle kind of thing. And then in the third one, I got this lesson about, you're here for a reason. You've got your package of karma that you are working on. And, from life to life to life to life, I presume. I don't have any past life memories or anything like that, but I can see how that would work. And so all of this suggests that there is this matrix of loving intelligence that we're a part of, the profound spiritual technology at work, right? And we're kind of riding on the surface of it. Or we feel like we're struggling materially, and every once in a while we kind of experience bliss or connection, unity. This is nice. I wish I could hold on to this. And then we're back to the grind.
Right.
And having that opportunity to turn that equation around and say, you know what? I'm lighter than air. Everything I see is a miracle. This is all this quantum reality that my observation is bringing into reality, And that's what the Nobel Physics Prize was about this year. Again, the efficacy of quantum physics. So this is going on, and I am a player in it. And every once in a while, I have to engage in the hardships of material life, and make sure the bills get paid and all that kind of stuff. But the rest of the time, I can be this kind of effervescent being of light who just happens to be occupying this body, And right now I got a bad hip, and it sucks. It's just but I can still look outside and witness, as in Islam they say, everywhere you look, you see the face of Allah. That God is in everything. It's everywhere.
Yeah.
It's getting over that misperception, that problem with perception that we have, that I'm separate, that I'm an individual who isn't connected to anything. Couldn't be farther from the truth, man.
So you've said a lot of things that kind of bring a lot of, things that I've been wrestling with my entire adult life. That brings them to the surface. One of them is, one of my favorite movies is Groundhog Day. And when you're talking about the karmic circles, those cycles that you have to keep living and living, and you found yourself kind of recycling those moments and the near-death experiences until you got the message that you needed, right? And how much of those karmic cycles do you experience? Maybe not on a daily basis, but in a routine way, where you're kind of seeing the same themes or the same people pop back into your life, and this is what I should do. This is how I need to help this person.
Pretty much all the time I am experiencing that sort of thing. And I think the reason why Groundhog Day strikes a lot of people so profoundly is that it really is about these eternal kind of lessons. When do you become teachable, right? It took me 3 very serious wake-up calls and then witnessing 9/11 to become teachable, finally, to become humble enough to allow a whole different reality to determine my life, rather than being defined by how I think it should be, that kind of stuff. And that was the issue with that character, right? He's an egomaniac. He's intensely self-centered. Nothing else enters into his world. He's the center of the world, kind of thing. And then you don't know how many days he wakes up. I mean, this could be millions of days in that movie.
Right.
And he goes through these kinds of stages until he comes to a place where he experiences absolute humility. You know, I think after my third near-death experience, I experienced that. Everything that I thought that I was and stuff apparently wasn't really the case, you know. And he has that where he finally becomes so humble that he just makes himself of service. He catches a kid falling out of a tree and he performs the Heimlich maneuver, right? You know?
Right.
And that's when he starts to, being teachable, he comes back around to this authentic participation, right? To who he really is. He's not some broadcaster or something. He's a person interacting with other people and fulfilling this kind of schedule that we have. Yeah. Like this is an educational facility we're all participating in. So he finally learns his lesson and he gets love as a result, right? Yeah. Andy McDowell. Yeah, pretty cool show. That's
the older I get, the more profound I find that movie.
Yeah.
But the next thing I wanted to mention was that you talked about this feeling of transcendence, and that's something I think a lot of people are searching for. I know in my own life, the times when I felt that transcendence have been moments when I've had to put aside myself, and it usually involves some very profane or mundane experiences. For example, there was a time when I was at the park with my son, and he says, "Dad, I need to go use the restroom." And I sent him off on his own, and the minutes, they're kind of passing by, and I'm like, "What happened to my son?" And I go in there, and there's just poo everywhere, right? It's just everywhere. And I my first reaction is this absolute rage at, you know, how could he allow this to happen? Doesn't he know that I'm now having to clean it up? And then kind of our eyes meet, and I see in his eyes fear and embarrassment and humiliation, and I realize he didn't ask for this. It wasn't something he was trying to accomplish. It was a situation got out of control, and he was doing his best. He's just a child, you know, and to this day, it still makes me emotional. Think about that moment when I lost self, when I made eye contact with him, and I was like, I know that feeling because I have been in over my head too. And I reached into the muck and I pulled him out and I cleaned it all up. And I experienced a moment, just a moment of transcendence.
Right.
It must be what it's like.
Right.
You know,
theoretically, I think you know how the Dalai Lama feels like all the time. Right? Because this is you're making some good karma. You made some very good karma. You could have gone the other way and been as stern and judgmental and marked your son for life. He probably would have bathroom problems for the rest of his life, right? I mean, childhood trauma is major in all of our lives. But instead, you have this moment of absolute humility, you know, and you are authentic, you're your authentic self. You immediately knock down that illusion of separateness. You see in his eyes, you know that experience yourself, and you're able to be of service and to do what you really can do, what you're really capable of, to fix this, make it right. And of course, you're aligned then. You just, you know, you dovetail into a deeper reality, right? Most people have the experience probably with a pet in their lap, you know, when they have their dog or their cat or something, and it's just a channel to divine consciousness. There's no judgment, you know, there's no skin in the game. It's just, thank you for sitting on my lap and connecting me to something deeper than all the bullshit that's going on, right? And so those are the moments that when I think of it as being on a glass bottom boat. You know how they have a glass bottom boat in glass bottom boats, sometimes they'll have a door and they open it up and you can look down and see this just like, holy cow, that's underneath me right now.
Yeah.
And then if you're the same place I was, which was in Thailand, they slam it shut and then they want $2 more to like open it up again. But that's kind of what happens, you know, the moment you get this opening, this transcendent opening through, it's hard to be a human. It's not easy. There's all kinds of stuff.
No, most times it's a pain in the butt.
Really. Literally, kind of in this case, right? But you can have that anytime. That's the craziest thing about it, is that it's always right here. I mean, if you close your eyes, it's not dark. It's never black, absolute blackness. There's always this kind of dance of stuff going on, light, right? You know, so this is inside of you, and when you open your eyes, then it comes in and fills out the imagery. Your brain creates the imagery and stuff. But this energy is in you all the time. So if anybody listening right now stops for a minute, just take a moment and sort of like uncoil. Okay. And then notice there's like a slight hum, or, you know, there's kind of a buzz that's in your fingertips, you know? Like, yeah, I'm alive. I'm connected to this mysterious energy that makes everything work. My heart's beating and stuff. And there it is. There, you know, it's right there all the time. We just get so caught up in our serial thinking and the misperception that that's who we are. And you end up chasing your tail a lot instead of experiencing that. You know.
Did they ever catch the people that in Arizona that did that?
Yeah, you know what happened with that? It was crazy because, you know, I went to the cops and stuff, and it was a couple of years later I got the full report. And it turned out that the cops were actually watching these guys go back and forth from their van and kicking me and stuff. And apparently, some of these guys were off-base Marines from a base south of the town that I was in.
Tucson.
And some of the cops, well, I was actually in Tempe.
Oh, Tempe. Okay.
But it was south of Tucson too, Fort Huachuca. And some of the cops had been those guys when they were younger. The cops had come out of the military and they stayed in Arizona and they joined law enforcement. And they had more in common with one another than they did with me. And I had a choice then. You want to go to a battle with the city and the police department with no witnesses, you know, because I didn't have the wherewithal to get people's phone numbers and stuff when the guy attacked me. You know, so nothing could be done about it. That was just the way that it went. And that was a great lesson in acceptance, you know. The bad stuff happens. Bad stuff.
They put a damper on their karma.
Exactly. I have that consolation. They're probably still working that off.
Yeah. Well, that's tough. Yeah.
So when you said the souls were circling around you during 9/11, that's what it felt like. Did you get anything out of that? Did you hear anything? Did you actually see anything, or was it just more of like a feel and like you just knew it was kind of happening?
Yeah, I mean, when I elaborate on it, it starts to be sort of like the last scene of Raiders of the Lost Ark, you know, kind of that. But it wasn't like that at the time. It was more of a psychic and spiritual sense, like I was in the middle of a tempest, and I didn't see like faces screaming by me or anything. I just had this sense that there had been this liberated energy, that there was this energy free in space kind of around me. And it was quite profound because, like I said, man, I like left town and I had to get a place that was way far away from other things so that I could, start to work on this aspect of myself and trying to align my perceptions with a deeper reality.
You mentioned that consciousness is a fundamental field, which is a physics concept, right? The fundamental fields, the electron field, and
also Hinduism. It's like Hinduism and Taoism. Those are
and I've heard, and we've mentioned on this program a couple times about the idea of consciousness being a fundamental field where each individual is kind of excitement of that field in the way that electrons are an excitement of electron field. And what was your perception of being a part of that consciousness field? Did you lose your sense of individuality when you kind of became enveloped by that collective field, or were you able to maintain it?
Well, it was because I only have the forms of communication as a human being that I can relate my near-death experiences to you using, right?
Right.
But it was it's a hard thing to describe exactly because it's a non-human experience of things. But I was able to be myself in some way because I can report it to you as what I saw.
Yeah.
Right. That kind of thing. But I did not have boundaries. I did not experience the same kind of boundaries. Certainly not physical. I had no sense of physicality whatsoever. And I had this much expanded kind of understanding, and things made sense. And like I said, no serial, no this. It was just like all at once.
Yeah.
All at once kind of a thing. And I think it's pretty hard to dispute the concept that consciousness is fundamental because you see it being expressed through all these different forms. I mean, from plants and animals to architecture and food, it's like what you put into it, it's reflecting back the energy that you bring to it all the time.
Yeah.
It's when you meet a new person and you're talking to them, you can just see all of this karmic data that they need to express to you, that this is what my experience has been. This is who I am. And we generate consciousness ourselves. Our brains are essentially, I think, like transmitters and projectors, kind of, right? And so we generate some ourselves, some consciousness ourselves. But then when you meditate a lot, you notice that there is a still small voice, like the Quakers call it, where you have this kind of voice of intuitive intelligence. It's like, I knew I shouldn't have done that. Well, that was your intuitive intelligence that's part of this greater collective field that was informing you about what works as a human being and what doesn't, and you weren't paying attention to it, that kind of thing. Right. So I think that it's showing itself all the time. And that we obviously are just kind of riding on it. It's around us, it's through us, it's expressing itself I'm expressing it through this package right now, so to speak. Yeah.
All right. I'm going to put up your website here for people interested in learning more. You can visit robertkopecky.com and tell us about the two books. So you wrote both of these after all three experiences, right?
Yeah, years after. Actually, after 9/11 and after the meditation really started. Yeah, the first book came out in 2014 and the second book in 2018. That's How to Get to Heaven Without Really Dying. That's the trick. And the first one, How to Survive Life and Death, is really for people with issues around dying, death and dying, because you know, I have a fairly lighthearted. I'm probably the most fun near death. I like to think of myself. If you want to talk about death and dying, we're going to have a better time than a lot of people, I think, will, because it ended up being a pretty positive experience for me, and I think it is a positive experience for people. And people who have somebody dying in their life or are looking at a terminal diagnosis themselves or something, you know, I think they can benefit by learning some of the lessons that near-death experiencers have to share about the sort of seamless nature of our existence and how we move from realm to realm to realm, apparently, you know, with quite a bit of ease and grace if we allow it. And so that's what How to Survive Life and Death is really about and who it's for. And How to Get to Heaven Without Really Dying is about that thing I was talking about. It's here right now. The theme of that book is a quote from the Gospel of Thomas, from the Gnostic Gospel, where Yeshua says, "The kingdom of heaven is spread across the earth, but men don't have eyes to see it." So if you work on the way you look at things, on your perception of life, you start to realize, I'm in heaven. This, you know, and it's easy for you. Sometimes you're like, oh yeah, this is definitely heaven. You know, beautiful camping, you're camping, beautiful sunrise, or you have a great experience, or even like the situation with your child in the restroom, you know, where suddenly this is it. This is what everybody is like this in heaven. You know, this is how everybody behaves there,
Yeah.
and it's available to you all the time. So that's what How to Get to Heaven Without Really Dying is about.
Well, that's wonderful. I often wonder about where we look for the divine, and through those experiences, that's kind of what I've learned, even though I don't know exactly how to take advantage of it all the time, is that the divine is everywhere. It's in the profane, it's in the mundane, it's in the ordinary experiences. And that's the thing I'm working on is being able to perceive it all the time.
Well, you might enjoy my second book because it's broken down in three parts, which are perspective, presence, and purpose. The three lessons that I got from the three near-death experiences, and it basically tells you how, you know, if you exercise kindness, honesty, humility, forgiveness, compassion, and service, if you put those things in front and you recognize that you are the other person and you're able to compassionately detach yourself and witness how difficult it is to be human and stuff, then you have that perspective, the spiritual perspective that you need to experience heaven. And if you are in the moment and you're listening to somebody and you're opening your heart to them and you're sharing and you're taking the opportunity to take actions to make something happen here in a beneficial way, then you've got that presence, you know, in the now, in the moment. And then you can recognize that, you know, all of this stuff is a pretty elaborate kind of machinery that's going on, and I fit into it a certain way. And this is really what my part is, you know. What do people want me to do? What do they enjoy having me do? What do they need me to do for them? And I can show up for that, and I can get this sense of purpose almost immediately and recognize my job is to be who I am authentically. And that's the purpose. And so if you follow those three parts, you end up experiencing it, I think. That's what that book is designed to do. So drop me your address and I'll send you a signed copy free of charge.
Oh, awesome.
Happily.
That's great. Yeah. I'll definitely take advantage of that.
Yeah.
Not everybody out there who might be watching this right now. It is available on my blog and website and all that stuff. And the first book is available through Mango Publishing, the distributors of that. And then everything's on Amazon. You know.
Nice. Well, thank you so much. Make sure everybody check out the books and get a copy and check out Robert's blog. And thank you so much, Robert, for joining us today. It has been an absolute pleasure. Your experiences and the lessons that you've learned from them have I think, really enriched us today, and we really appreciate it. For our audience, please give us a like and subscribe, and we strive to give more of this type of content to you guys all the time. And if you have any questions for Robert, his email is right here on his website. You can shoot him an email, and I'm sure he'd be willing to share more thoughts with you, maybe that are contained outside of the book. I don't know. But,
always. Yeah. Thanks so very much, guys. It's been really a pleasure to talk to you.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Until next time, keep on exploring the edges of the unknown.